Well, I am Chuck Ross, or as I was known here in town, Choppy. But when you grow up and go out into the world, you can't have a name like that. You have to explain it to everybody. So yeah, Chuck, yeah, whatever you feel comfortable with calling me. I grew up here. My grandfather ran the old L.E. White Lumber Company from 1899 through 1901. And then he was not happy here. He ran the Mendocino Lumber Company from 1902 through 1924. He met Lamont Rollins, and hey, by the way, I found some Lamont Rollins stuff. He met Goodyear family, the tire and rubber people, had bought this mill from L.E. White Lumber Company in 1916. And the man, Lamont Rollins, who was running it, was from Picayune, Mississippi, and he was a very busy man. And he had to keep coming out here, and I don't think coming to Greenwood was a real easy prospect in the teens and 20s. He happened to run into my grandfather on the train from San Francisco to Healdsburg, where he was going to catch the stage, and learning that he had run this company back at the turn of the century, offered him the job. My grandpa, by this time, was thinking he needed to be involved as an owner. He felt he needed his own sawmill. So is the mic working?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Is that too dark or is it okay?
Yeah. So anyway, they offered him 25% of the company to come back and run it. Yes.
I was just curious, was there a highway between Mendocino and Elk?
There was a road, a wagon road, and you'll see pictures of it in various things. It was a dirt road, and they would have to like put gravel in the wet spots and stuff like that. There wasn't always a bridge on the Navarro River. For a time there was a ferry, and maybe sometimes the ferry wasn't working. You'd have to go way inland and come back. So yeah, getting around was pretty arduous. There was, up until the 20s, there was a train to Cloverdale, and then you catch a stage, which by then was a truck or a bus or something like it was, but not a nice air-conditioned, stereo playing kind of bus like we have now. Or you could take one of the lumber schooners. They took passengers in both directions, and staterooms built for three. They said there were 3 bunk beds in a little tiny cabin. So when the lumber company went out of business in the Depression, my grandfather took some of the property here in town in lieu of a bunch of back wages and bonuses and stuff like that. And we ended up with all this property here that is now from right about here down just past Beacon's driveway, about a quarter mile. We had all that ocean frontage, and first 2 miles of Greenwood Creek. Sounds really impressive. My mom sold it in 1962 for less than I paid for that van out there. So don't be impressed. But anyway, I grew up in the old company hotel right here. It burned in '56. There were two houses here and 2 more over here. We moved into these 2 houses out here on the end of the point, and that's where I lived until I was in high school, and I moved up onto Beacon's Ranch and lived in a cabin up there for the rest of my time here. So anyway, that's who I am, and thank you for sitting through that. Okay, so this is going to be just a little informal, talking about things. Did you give them copies of the timeline?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
Does anybody else want a copy? Or?
I think, I've been working on that thing for about 20 years. This is the first time I've ever seen it in print today.
Yeah.
Every date I'm going to mention in here is mentioned in there. But I wanted to put this together so you could see the visual image along with the information. I think it's probably going to consolidate it a little bit. So you are here, or maybe there. No, I guess we're first thing. I'll start way up at the north. You recognize that place? Really kind of a scary road. Kavanaugh Grade. It is a misspelling of the Kavanaugh family who farmed there, both sides of the gulch. He's buried in Mendocino. Spelling wasn't an exact science in the 19th century. So, yeah, that's one of my favorite places. Famous picture of the blue whale on the beach was right there. That little rock outcropping sticking out there, I know exactly where that is. 75-foot blue whale, and Otis Johnson, the son of C.R. Johnson, who owned Union Lumber Company, fell through that whale. He first saw it was decomposing, and he walked up on its back and regretted it. They made him walk home. The next little place here, moving south, that little gulch just past the cemetery is Sartori Gulch. And it's named after Augustus Sartori. He was a Swiss. He had leased property and run dairy cattle, and then he finally bought this place. An attorney named Jesse Nichols owned that ranch back there for a time. I know his niece pretty well. The Nichols family, they also owned the Mendocino Beacon newspaper. Hello. So, yeah, I talked to, I think it's his granddaughter or his great-granddaughter. She lives in Petaluma now, and had no idea this place was, named for him or that anybody had ever lived there or anything. But she didn't have any further interest in it. So now we're down to the Cuffy's Cove Cemetery, my future home. Cuffy's Cove sat right there on the, that was the town site. The plat matches up to just about there. That one building, that white roof there, you can see, that's the Kenny home, and that's the last remaining residence of Cuffy's Cove. And it's one of the oldest.
So that red is the town site. Cool.
Yeah. The plaque is in the hallway in the back of the visitor center on the right side, and you can see it's like 19 streets they ambitiously had laid out. I don't think the reality of it was ever anything like that. Yeah.
With both sides of Highway 1?
Well, that's kind of indistinct. It's kind of hard to tell. If you
Up closer to the ocean.
If you ever park there at the famous viewpoint right there, look in under the trees here, and you can see excavated building sites. That was the commercial district. You can still see where the building stood. I poked around in there one day when I was young and not afraid of the brush, and it wasn't worth it. There was nothing to be seen. Yeah. I'm sorry?
Where was the mill?
Oh, there was no mill at Cuffy's Cove. There was a, you should have been at the first one here last year. There was a shingle mill here in Laurel Gulch, and there was reportedly a sawmill in Laurel Gulch. We don't know if it was a sawmill as you would think of a sawmill. It may have been nothing more than a pit saw, a frame they roll a log onto, and one guy stands below and the other guy stands on top, and they work the saw. That was considered a sawmill. I don't know, but I can tell you this. Many of the thousands, hundreds of thousands of the ties on the Transcontinental Railroad came out of that gulch. They had tie crews making railroad ties all up and down the coast. A man named West Evans, one of the principals in the first railroad here at Cuffy's Cove, was the tie merchant, sold every tie to the Central Pacific Railroad from the ferry slip at Oakland to Promontory, Utah. Had to have been an enormously prosperous man. So there was no mill there. It was largely a little agricultural settlement. It was just on the frontier. You take, yes?
Did he have a palatial home or just an ordinary?
West Evans, he appears to have died penniless in Oakland. He got involved in the electrification of Oakland with DC electric at batteries, and he got burned by his battery acid and died a short time later. And one of the other things I can find about him in the newspaper was he came home, found a salesman in his house showing his wife a sewing machine. He picked the sewing machine out and threw it out the window and escorted the man out in similar fashion, and he went to jail. There's more to that, and I'll come back and cover that in a future thing. And he's a man almost forgotten by history. You know the famous golden spike at Promontory, right? That tie was donated by West Evans. The plaque on that tie is still in, I forgot where, maybe University of California has it or something. It's of laurel wood. I think that tie, that famous tie, came out of that gulch. That's my opinion. Because he was here, West Evans was here in Cuffy's Cove. All right. The shipping facilities down there was wire chutes and apron chutes. Apron chute is like a playground slide, and they just throw the lumber down that falls off on the deck of the ship. Wire chute was a cable that ran back and forth, and they'd sling cargo in both directions. Because all the manufactured goods and stuff had to come in through the port. The ship would have that as a backhaul. That's the James Kenney home. That's the old road from Anderson Valley. It came over Greenwood Ridge, up what we would call Cameron Road now, to just past Smith Ranch, and then down the north bank of Laurel Gulch to Cuffy's Cove, because there was no Greenwood.
Wait, that was Cameron Road?
No, the other end of that was it meets what we now call Cameron Road. Hey, and guys, I'm sorry, I'm stone deaf in this ear, and this ear is really old. And it worked in a sawmill for 2 years with no hearing protection. So, so feel free to throw something at me to get my attention. If I see your lips moving, it's a lot easier for me to know I'm being asked a question. And worst of all, I can't locate where sound's coming from. Seriously, your voices are coming from over here somewhere. So y'all quit that. All right. In 1875, they built a 3-foot gauge railroad. I think the 3-foot gauge was just because the locomotive was lighter, the excavation required for the rail bed was easier. You didn't have to move as much dirt. So 3-foot gauge railway, no locomotive. Horses pulled carts of shingles, ties, or maybe some lumber out to the shipping point there. So Phillips Brothers and Well Brothers owned a shingle mill there. Rodney Phillips became the first postmaster of Greenwood. If you look at that Greenwood book, it'll mention Rodney Phillips. Rodney Forsyth Phillips. What else have I got here for Cuffy's Cove? All right, moving south. Now we're looking at the mouth of Laurel Gulch, right there. Mile 35, just north of town. And yeah, Sawmill reported as having existed up there, and there's some kind of confusing wording in the old newspaper accounts that said the mill was moved up into the canyon. Or they mean that canyon or some other canyon. The canyon is not very specific. Mendocino Railroad after sometime after 1875 was extended farther south and up what we now call Greenwood Creek. There was a ship built right there. I was down there, visited that beach, really hard to get to. I was down there last year about this time and found one piece of iron that might have been associated with building a ship there. I thought this was just an anecdote. Oh, by the way, Helen N. Kimball was Helen Naomi White Kimball. She was Ellie White's sister, married to John Kimball of Cuffy's Cove, who you might look at as being the founder of the Matson steamship line. Ultimately, that's kind of where the family went. It's kind of an interesting story. Well, I thought that boat was just, oh yeah, okay, so by the way, that happened. That boat sailed the Eastern Pacific for 20 years. So that's quite a record for a schooner, for a wind-driven ship. As far north as Nome, as far south as Panama. Later in its life, it started running to Hawaii quite a bit. I have a bill of lading from some of those. It's amazing what the thing would carry. It was finally blown onto a coral reef 1,000 miles south of Hawaii in 1901. That's pretty cool. I can't find a picture of it. So now we're getting down closer here to the city limits. That offshore rock there, you notice that notch in it. So there's the Donahue Ranch. We'll talk about them in a bit. City limit sign's about there. That's what we call St. Anthony's Point now. I don't know what it's called now. It's still called that. Mendocino Railroad continued on through town. Formerly Dinty Doyle Point. I cannot get a single newspaper hit on Dinty Doyle. I have no idea where that name comes from. My mother told me that the earlier owner agreed to sell it to the Nanella family if they would name it after St. Anthony. So that was the reason for that name. Yeah, the Chisholm chute was, I don't know that if it was ever used, but it was an ambitious effort there to run a chute off, there's a house out there, it's right across the yard from the house. That notch is where it passed through, but I don't know. I can't find in San Francisco shipping news. I can't find any mention of it. When I was a kid, there was a water wheel laying down there at the bottom of that waterfall, and that made electricity for the north end of town during the Depression. My mother lived in one of those houses for a while.
That's just below Harbor House, right?
Yeah, they have a trail that goes down to the beach, and it goes by that waterfall. Still buried in the scree slope is that water wheel. It's covered completely. They don't even know it's there, but it is. Not much left of it. Oh, by the way, that creek, that watershed, there goes the railroad on by, that watershed was known as Double Bridges Creek. You'll find in some of the old timers refer to the schoolyard as the Indian camp. And the inland Pomo especially would come over here in the summertime, escape the valley heat, I suppose, and the ocean provided a lot of stuff for them. They would camp there. Nice, convenient source of fresh water in that little creek and stuff like that. So it was a good place to camp. There's the actual watershed, and it's called Double Bridges Creek. And so the middle fork, there's kind of underground in the middle. It's a good-sized gulch up above. It drains maybe 20, 30 acres up there. But there's no running water at the surface, but I think the field is kind of marshy there in the springtime. Over there at just out of the picture, there was a cattle pass across this creek, a clear path down and an easy walk across the creek and stuff like that. And in 1881, young John Donahue found a mastodon skull, about 3 feet of it, and one tooth and the eye socket in that creek. I found that out from a Reno newspaper. That's odd enough. But anyway, I think that's where it was. If anybody wants to go digging for it, get the new owner's permission. This is a 1929 map I acquired recently. And so, yeah, well, I'll just show you where we are. I don't need a pointer. So here we are. There's the visitor center. The Drew House, which is the original boss's house. When I was a kid, we called it the Drew House because Frank C. Drew lived there about 1900 to about 1916. That was his home. I think they spent more time in San Francisco than they did here, but it was the Drew House. The PG&E substation up off Boonville Avenue, right about there.
Do you know when the PG&E substation was put in?
What's that? Oh, yeah. It was about 1960.
Okay.
Yeah, roughly.
Right.
A local who lived right about here, Idolo Sanini, was a PG&E lineman, and in the winter of
I
'58.
remember him.
Do you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It was Stanini.
He was electrocuted after repairing storm damage, and somebody activated that whole section. Very nice man.
Yeah. Eleanor's husband. Eleanor Stanini.
Eleanor, yeah.
Yeah.
UFO lady.
Yeah.
Yeah. Master's Garage still there. The Greenwood Creek Bridge would be that little red strip there. So the old bridge that you see just to the right of it, the old wooden bridge, just upstream from the present concrete bridge. And I have a whole history of the bridges over Greenwood Creek. I think I count 5 of them.
And the 2 bridges in town, the one between Harbor House
Yeah.
and the school, and then the one between, what's it called, Spirit Rock now, and the Visitors.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Those
There
were
were.
still there when I came in '69.
Oh, okay.
Both of them.
I was gone by then, but yeah.
Footbridges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody who worked at Greenwood Lumber Company built that one, the Lifu Gulch, because the original one had fallen down. When I was a little kid, the old original wooden ones were there. We would go down below that one in Lifu Gulch and crawl up under a cribbing log, and we'd be virtually in a cave. We would be inside the cribbing that the highway was laid over. We could crawl clear up to the Methodist Church underground.
Whoa.
Hey.
Hey, Mark, yeah, well, the official starts at 5:30. This is a docent training.
But you're welcome to stay.
Yeah, just,
Oh, okay. You know what? No, I'm unloading. So
Okay.
I'm just gonna come back. Yeah, come back in an hour. I'll be back at 5:30.
Okay. Okay, Harbor House up there at the north end. So some local place names, yeah, that was called the Indian Camp. This is the Greenwood Trail coming down that little ridge right there. That from inland, horse travel, foot travel, wagon if you were willing to work at it. Yeah, I'm sure. And that was the Indian Trail as well. Cliff Ridge over here has always been empty grassy fields, no trees, not a lot of brush on top. And oddly enough, there's some good sources of fresh water along the top of that ridge. Usually you have to go down into the gullies to find the fresh water. Cliff Ridge has long been, the soil's so rocky up there, not much will grow. So it's always been grassy. You can see it from above San Francisco. You can see Cliff Ridge towering over the other little nondescript ridges here. Okay, the Greenwood Trail was right between Bonee Gulch and Kentfield Gulch. And I'll bet you not anybody in this room knew that was called Kentfield Gulch before. The one on the left, there's a property there that goes up that ridge, and the gulch to the left of it. Kentfield ran the lumber company for a time. There's the Donahue home up in the corner there. Chisholm Chute up there at St. Anthony's Point. The wharf ran down that point, across that string of lower rocks, and then along the north face of the big table rock there. The White and then later Goodyear sawmill right there. Dam number 1 was right on the beach at Greenwood Creek. Those rock outcroppings right on the beach were part of the dam. And it backed water up to roughly there, I would guess around 40 acres or so of water. Some of it was pretty shallow, and their logs would get stranded, and they lay there until the 50s when Leo Curti and his son Danny went and made split stuff out of them. There was a dam number 2 right there. It didn't back water up real far, and the canyon is kind of narrow. You can still see a few timbers from that dam up there on the Alder Flat. The Horseshoe Bridge that took the railroad. So the railroad came from uptown here. The old Cuffy's Cove Railroad was over here, and he's cut a switch into it and built the railroad here, and then it went up the creek, crossed there, up the south side, and down to Elk Creek, and that's how they logged out Elk Creek and Alder Creek. So the Horseshoe Bridge was, you can see it's quite a curve to it. There's still a few timbers remaining. If you went down the trail across the street from the PG&E substation, there's a trail that goes there. Right at the bottom where you get down to the old railroad right away, just step into that pepperwood grove across the tracks from you, and you'll see the ends of that, the Horseshoe Bridge. Yeah, school is there, Catholic Church, you knew those things. St. Anthony's Point. I'm getting old, I repeat myself, right?
It's okay, we might need repetition.
A lot of senior moments here. All right. Yeah, some of the Gunderson Rock, of course, is the big dinosaur rock across, right opposite the beach. Casket Rock is the white one out beyond the end of the wharf. Mile Rock, but on the charts, for some reason, nautical charts, it's listed as Nose Rock. It was a mile from Cuffy's Cove. And that's also the rock that the steam schooner Alcatraz hit. There's an Elk Rock, but it's down past, it's another white kind of a dome rock. It's down just past Elk Creek. That is Elk Rock, and sometimes called White Rock.
Can I ask,
Yeah.
why is it called Elk Creek? Were there elk here?
Yes, there were. As a matter of fact, I found a really old elk antler in the North Fork of Elk Creek one time. They've reintroduced them. Is that bull elk still around here? That thing was down by past Galetti's. It got into my sister's yard and was eating the flowers or whatever, and it got its antler hooked on a wheelbarrow, and it started shaking its head. It beat the heck out of her car. She was really, really annoyed with that elk. It was a really imposing animal, but yeah. So let's see, south side of Greenwood Creek. Now we're getting a little farther down. Boy, it looks like it closed the mouth of the creek just about the same spot this year. This is, by the way, I don't know if you guys have this on your computers, California Coastal Records Project. Guy's a tech bazillionaire, and he, every year or so, he takes a helicopter and he takes a photograph of the shoreline about every 800 feet, all the way from Mexico to Oregon. and they're all on, and these are incredibly high resolution, really good photographs. I've contributed information to him on some of the photographs, but and he got sued by Barbara Streisand for putting a picture of her house at Malibu. So he went into court with all this stuff that he just got easily off the internet. Yes, yeah, all kinds of personal data on her. You have no expectation of privacy anymore, folks. I'm sorry, but
Are the photos free?
oh yes, yeah. You can just go on and you can do a search, or if you know the name of the photo, they all have a number, but some of them are assigned a name. All right.
It's very up to date.
Yeah, oh yeah. That's a wonderful service he does. I like what some people do with their money. Okay, that was the Greenwood Trail. Comes down that ridge right there, between between Boney and Kentfield Gulch. Yeah, so there they are. James Greenwood's homestead was actually below the highway, right there near the confluence of Boney and Greenwood Creek. There may still be some buildings in the brush down there. In about 59 or so, a friend's stupid horse crow hopped off the edge of that road going down there and ended up on its back between a building and the bank behind it in poison oak 20 feet deep. And my sister and her stupid friend and another stupid friend had to go in and cut brush and dismantle a building to get the stupid horse back. Worst case of poison oak I ever saw on anybody. But go ahead and look for those buildings. I've seen some of them. The Elk Creek Railroad climbed up out of the canyon there. So yeah, that's the old railroad right of way right there, run along the top of the bluff on that side.
Whoa,
Yeah.
along the cliff.
Yeah,
Yeah, right there, you can see it.
Wow.
yeah. And that guy's home over there, he's just like almost right up against it.
Okay. Can you,
Yeah.
going pretty fast, south side of Greenwood.
It's recorded.
Oh,
Okay.
we should go there tonight, Ernie. Beacon Light.
The Beacon Light, everybody knows where that is. I'll be staying there tonight. I did Bobby some favors. I could sort of drink free at his bar. Anyway, the railroad ran down the coast to Elk Creek, and you might not know, but that's the Britt Greenwood homestead. That's where Todd Nichols lives now. I lived there in the cabin out back. I've eaten fruit off of Britt Greenwood's trees. I don't think I've ever seen any building that was there in Britt Greenwood's time, because it was a pretty long time ago. But that's it. A couple more place names back there. Later, the Greenwood, I think it may have changed hands twice, I'm not sure, but Boney, and there are Boney family buried up near the Beacon Light. They used to call that the Boneyard, one little area of the fields there, and they would not tell Bobby where it was. That's Hawkins Gulch back there, and the Hawkins was from Alabama, and he didn't have a lot of luck out here, but he had quite a little bit of property. There's a story of $6,000 in gold coin buried on that place. I think if that was, Bobby would have had his cat out there and he'd have dug down 40 feet of that old thing.
So is that land all Bobby's now?
I'm sorry?
Is that all Bobby's land now?
Yes, unless Todd Nichols. Todd Nichols has bought some big parcels from him over the last few years, but yeah, but it is part of that ranch, and I'll be talking about the Greenwood Ranch tonight, and you'll kind of see where that. All right, farther down, here comes the Greenwood Railroad, and again, it runs right along the top of the bluff. And from about here, about the middle of this picture, it was pretty much a level run until Elk Creek rose up to meet it. And where Camp 1 was established, just below Rafters Dam, that's kind of where it came together with the tracks. You notice the trail down that rocky point?
Yeah.
That is Uncle Abe's Landing. And I always thought that was another failed attempt at a landing. I find that in San Francisco shipping records for 10 years, yes.
The house, there's a house, yes, at the far left of the picture?
Yeah,
Yeah, I rented that for $50 a month. Yeah, and then her father moved in a month or so later.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, and then they raised, Walter Matson owned it, he raised
Yes.
the rent to 70. And we
Oh my
sold it
God.
down. Oh my God. $70 a month.
When I left here, I found out that people in other parts of the world have to buy firewood. I couldn't imagine that.
Yeah.
We'd take the Daniels Ross dump truck, park it under the conveyor, and stand up there. And Georgie Burke ran the trim saws. When they were running really pitchy Douglas fir, he'd just drop all the saws and cut it into 2-foot lengths for us. We'd pitch that thing full in about 20 minutes. Yeah, Uncle Abe's Landing, about 10 years. I think it was either tan bark or railroad ties. I don't think they ever shipped any lumber off of that little point. But that's a totally unprotected little anchorage right there. I have so much admiration for those schooner crews.
I know that John and I made it down to the beach. We would go fairly often to the beach on the left.
Okay.
And then on a really low tide, we could get out to that beach right in the middle of the
Right, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I used to play up and down that cliff. And I got a picture of me at the, yeah,
That's a pretty
scamper up and down there like it had no sense at all. I find today I walk down to the beach and back, I don't stand as close to the edge of the cliff as I used to. I used to hang my toes over.
No, I wouldn't do that. Yeah.
All right, farther down,
Okay.
now we got the mouth of Elk Creek.
Okay.
And yeah, so the railroad went up, crossed the North Fork, Stevenson Bridge, and on up the main canyon. This is one of the little mysteries. I don't know how they logged the North Fork of Elk Creek. I only know that they did. This is Rocky Canyon going up here. I helped build this road right here. I helped with the blasting. We had to dynamite that road out for half a mile of it is just dynamited out of the cliffside. But all this back here, I would make it a couple thousand acres. It's a north-facing canyon in the fog belt. It's a redwood rookery. And when Beacon and Ross started logging that in 1962, the second growth redwood was just enormous. It's just, but and there's no railroad up there, so I don't know how they logged that out. Anyway, it's a cute little mystery. That is the last sawmill built at Elk. It was built in 1962. I worked there for about a year and a half before I went inland to work for a while, but Greenwood Lumber Company. That's the North Fork trestle. It was second highest on the line, the most massive trestle on the line. I calculated nearly 2 million board feet of old growth redwood in that structure, and it was burned, and I cannot find out when it happened. It was deliberately burned after the railroad was abandoned. Kids would walk across that to get up Elk Creek to go fishing, and I think it was maybe Dutton family or maybe the Ornbaums burned it. It and the Stevenson Bridge. All right, a little farther up was the Stevenson Bridge right there. No stream at all there. You can step across that little tiny creek. But you see the right end there. You can see that's kind of a steep ridge coming down there, and the railroad wraps right around it. If they had gone back in the Gulf, they would have had to dig a tunnel. The trains could not have made that corner, and that's the reason for a bridge 100 feet high and 532 feet long. Another 2 million board feet of old growth redwood in the timber. So that's where the Stevenson Bridge was. I cannot get a single hit on old newspapers on Stevenson on the Mendocino coast. I don't know who they were, but apparently that was their farm down there below the bridge. All right, so, and it went on up, and they went all the way up Elk Creek, over the hill into Alder Creek, up and down Alder Creek, up Alder Creek, across Mountain View Road, just out past Piper's, just over into the Garcia River watershed. That's how far this railroad went, 40 miles from the mill back there to end of track. Uncle Abe's Landing over here, Uncle Abe's cabin was right there. I used to live right next door to it. It was kind of overgrown with brush. It was full of antique furniture. We found a walking stick with a sword in it. That's just so cool. All that stuff long gone, of course. I don't know when, and I just got asked this too, I don't know when this ranch down here was first established. The oldest records I can find, references to it, I can find are Herrick Ranch, then Shibley Ranch. And the Shibleys, you'll find the other monographs about from the old timers, Walter Matson and others will mention Lem Shibley was the son. and he became a hotel man in San Francisco. I met him at the Golden Gate Hotel, which is now the Union Square Hotel in San Francisco when I was a kid.
Ken Ornbaum lived in San Francisco for quite a while.
Yes, yeah,
I remember Ken.
yeah.
Yeah.
The Ornbaums lived there later, and they named it Blue Gates, and that's a name that still sort of sticks. And if you want to buy that property, Bobby would be happy to sell. He wants $13 million for it. I'd give him $500,000, but.
That includes the fees, right? Is that what
And all the cattle that migrate across the road and down there to graze on that grass. The last place I'll cover is Schleberg, and it survives as a place name, and it's one of those place names that is in danger of being forgotten. John Schleberg farmed right here. That is called the Schleberg Road, but I'll bet you nobody up there who lives up there knows that. And the last place there was Sugarloaf Ranch. There are 4 silos. Yeah, it's an old sea stack. And the fall, yeah. My nephew Ross and I just went up and crawled around in the brush there and found there's 3 or 4 silos still hidden away in the trees from that one. So anyway, that's the southern end, from Kavanaugh on the north to Schleberg on the south. That's our name. You know, I never did. I'm sorry. I got to apologize. These are hand-drawn maps of the 3 creeks, and I never did put all the captions on them. Sorry. We'll just talk about them for a second. You can see parts of Greenwood Creek from the Greenwood Ridge, the Greenwood Philo Road, or Vinegar Ridge Road. The actual ultimate source of Greenwood Creek, the headwaters, I was just looking at it. This is Signal Ridge Road, Pronsolino Ranch right here. This is fields here, and there's a rock quarry on this side of the road. The creek runs down this little valley with beautiful redwood and stuff like that. The road turns down through it. That's Greenwood Creek right there. And the source is a spring up there on the hillside near the old Bloyd property. So just some place names up there. These were so familiar when I was young. And like I say, I hate to see them forgotten. Of course, they can be renamed something else. Working our way up creek with the Boney and Kentfield Ghost, and the Helmke Sawmill was right below the junction of Cameron Road and Greenwood Ridge Road, which used to be called the Boot Jack. You see how they come together? You know, the boot jack, a person put their boot heel in and pull their foot out of a boot. That was it suggested that to the old timers who used boot jacks. So that's the Boot Jack. There was actually a saloon up there, and
Saloon
yeah,
at the crossroads?
yep.
Oh, wow.
I've never seen any of the buildings that were there or anything. It was, in fact, it was Eddie Lucy's Landing when I was my earliest memory. Most of the tributaries, until we get to Camp D and Lanahan Gulch, most of the tributaries are off the Cliff Ridge side. Lanahan Gulch was sometimes called the North Fork of Greenwood Creek. That's not exactly correct, but you may find a map that refers to it that way. John Ross and I walked down Lanahan Gulch all the way to Greenwood Creek and looked around down there, and we got one more place to go down there. We're going to do that again. Just upstream from Greenwood Creek, from Lanahan Gulch, you can see the creek squiggles back and forth there. Looks like a meandering stream like you'd find in Mississippi. This is between really hard rock ridges. It's a really rugged stretch of creek. And in one place there, Warren Daniels pointed this out to me. The railroad came along, crossed the creek, ran about 20 feet on the other bank, and then straight across the creek on an identical bridge. They were called the Twin Bridges. If anybody ever brings you a picture of 2 identical railroad bridges end to end, let me know. I'd like to see a picture of it.
So what's above Lanahan Gulch?
Lanahan,
Whose house or property?
you know, I don't know Greenwood Ridge Road well enough, but Johnny, yeah, my brother is John, he's Johnny, I'm sorry. And then there's Jack. He used to graze his horses here. It's on the Greenwood Creek side. Was it not Fast Shower? It was.
It's MRC now, right?
There is a no. I just drove by there yesterday. There's people live there. It's the old ranch house there.
Yeah.
But darn if I know who.
It's the old staff shower, man.
Yeah, okay, that's where it is. And it was just right behind the house, just down to the Greenwood Creek side. On the Cliff Ridge side, this Devil's Kitchen, very, very visible. If you can get to where you can see that side of the creek, big rocky end of a ridge. It was just an awful place to log, and that's where my father started working for his father out there logging that Devil's Kitchen. Next little gulch, I think this is opposite John and Toby's Barn Gulch, and it's kind of a double watershed. Wait a minute, I missed Valenti. No, Valenti Gulch is farther up. Barn Gulch. Valenti is a pretty big watershed. Then there's another little gulch showing there just to the left of Russian Gulch. Historically, that's been Simpson's Gulch or Simmons Gulch. We don't know which. We've never seen it in writing. I can't get a single hit on either of those names in the newspapers. But what I do have is that a young man from Janesville, California, up by Susanville, went to work, first day on the job, fell off that trestle and was killed. He's buried up in Susanville now. And that was the only mention I could find of that. But the bridge itself was pretty impressive because the railroad came and it just dropped right down to its full height and ran across the flat like that and then right up. So the bridge was only about 80 feet high only. 80 feet down is a lot farther than 80 feet up, by the way, guys. It ran its full height, almost its entire length. My mother still remembers it very well. Farther, and then we do have a legitimate South Fork of Greenwood Creek, and it heads up under Cold Spring Mountain where the old fire lookout was. Off to the east side there is Russian Gulch. Elk Redwood Products had their mill right there. That was where my parents first lived together. They had a cabin out there. He and Warren Daniels started that mill, and Linton Knight and a few other people started that mill because the big mill was shut down in the Depression. They couldn't, and it was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. They couldn't use the big mill, but they were able to use they were able to cut the timber and all that kind of stuff. There was millions of board feet of timber left standing when they shut the big mill down. So they built that, and it ran for 3 years and provided a lot of employment, and then it burned to the ground.
That was the one that wasn't insured?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So I moved over. My mother, father, and their first 3 children are now unemployed. All the investment, they had raised all this money to invest in that. They're deep in debt in the bottom of the Depression. They plowed their way up out of that. Hard times. Yeah. All right, let's see. Oh, yeah, so here's, in 1875, that's railroad was pushed up there to the Helmke sawmill. That was the Mendocino Railroad. And later on, L.E. White bought it just as a, oh, by the way, purchase. He ended up taking out the rails and probably reusing it on the way down to Elk Creek, which is where we're headed next. So around 1888, they pushed the railroad on down to Elk Creek, and he started working on the mill, started working on the town, drained all the employment out of Cuffy's Cove and into the new town of Greenwood, and Cuffy's Cove just withered on the vine, and Greenwood flourished. So on up Elk Creek, I'll put the railroad in there again. Camp 1, Camp 2 was way up the creek, clear over the divide into Alder Creek. So there's a South Fork, and no kidding, South Fork on Elk Creek, and there is a lake alleged to have been created by the 1906 earthquake, big slide. It isn't much of a lake. We just discovered an aerial photograph that does show it, but it's hard to see the surface of the water. There's some kind of moss or algae or something like that growing on the surface of it. People have walked into that lake thinking they were stepping on a little grassy field or something, including my sister. Skunk Flat was a little farther up. Bishop's Gulch. There's several good photographs of the Bishop's Gulch trestle. Gravelly Gulch is a big watershed. It's kind of a funny story. I had hiked up Elk Creek back before any of the logging roads were built, and I'd found a big stack of fish plates, those metal pieces they bolt railroad rail together with. It got 4 holes in them. You bolt the sections together. Found a big stack of them that was left there when they tore up the rails. Burt Rudolph of Willits collected locomotives. It was his collection that created Roots of Motive Power. It started it. I sent Burt up there to find those fish plates, and either he or I went up Gravelly Gulch instead of Elk Creek. So I don't know, somewhere up there. Anyway, he never found them, and they were just really easy to find. I don't know if I had it wrong or he had it wrong, but boy, he came back, this tired old man, sweating, thorn scratched. Three Springs Creek is a very big watershed. Sulphur Fork and then Soda Fork. There's you have at the visitor center, there's a photograph of a locomotive upside down below a bridge. That was at Soda Fork. And the headwaters of Elk Creek are up on Cold Spring Mountain. So, Alder Creek. Now I'm going to bring the railroad back in, and it came up that gulch and down, up all the way to the end. End of track was up across Mountain View Road. Down Alder Creek, around the end of Adams Ridge, you could see Manchester from the end of track. You could see Point Arena. The big location out there was Camp 11. Salsig is where the railroad split to go upstream or downstream. The railroad trestle was on a Y, and you have pictures of that. You've got them in the visitor center. It went up the North Fork a little bit. Later on, Salsig was in a lot of deep shade, and later on they moved its functions up just upstream to Manzanita. But Camp 11 was the big one. You do have a big panoramic photograph of Camp 11. Camp 11 must have had close to 1,000 people. Yeah, I had no idea the payroll was that big. It's a big camp. And then those three creeks, John Creek, Tin Can Creek, and Nye Creek, all north facing in the fog belt, infested with redwood, just absolutely infested with it. I've hiked all over up in there. It is awful country, especially off the end of Adams Ridge. It's a pretty good sized waterfall up there too. Anyway, that was where they went. Like I say, from end of track down there by Buck Peak, about 40 miles back to the mill. Oh, are we back here? That's because after Elk Creek and Alder Creek closed out, in 1909, they ran a new railroad up Greenwood Creek, and it started out below the old Mendocino Railroad, quite a bit below it, and it crossed, the tracks would have crossed at the old Helm Key sawmill site, right below the, but they didn't share any trackage at all. The 1875, the Mendocino Railroad, I just ran across their report to the California Railroad Commission in 1876. That stretch from the substation, the PG&E substation, to the Helm Key sawmill, that stretch is almost exactly 1/2 of trestle work. They did very little grade excavation up there. They just mostly filled the gulch up with logs and ran the tracks across the top of it. I was never able to follow that railroad right away for more than 100 yards or so any time in my life when I was willing to crawl through tick brush. 1916, they extended the tracks farther up the creek, so past the Helm Key sawmill. Well, in 1909, they probably went up to about Lanahan Gulch, and in 1916, they started again. 1916, working up there somewhere in the vicinity of Barn Gulch, a steam shovel, actual steam-powered shovel, tipped over, killed one guy, and pinned a man named Juck Buchanan, who used to live in a cabin right over here. Juck is one of the Cuffy's Cove Buchanans, but he was kind of like the character of the family. He drank a little bit. He was pinned under that shovel for a couple of days while they're trying to right the shovel without dropping it on him, and also, meanwhile, tunneling in under it to try. So he was a couple of days under that thing. He told us about that when we were kids. They were chopping on the thing, weren't they? All right. My great Uncle Bill lived with us until shortly before he died at 89 in 1955. So he was born in 1865. Lincoln was just dead when he was born. He was an old logger and ox team logger. So his ankles were just, he jumped off a stump out near Glen Blair somewhere and broke both ankles. and walked out of the woods on 2 broken ankles. That tough old bird. And when I say walked out of the woods, I mean a couple of miles. This railroad was in use from until 1930, until the end of the show for the big mill, and then Elk Redwood Products used it again from 34 to 36, but they used it backwards. The railroad used to carry logs to the mill. Now it carried finished lumber from the Elk Redwood Products mill down to town, and they did some shipments off this wharf in 34 to 36. I have a picture of what looks to be the Helen P. Drew in here in about 1934. Briefly, but they also had the lumber truck. They hauled it east through the valley and so forth. So, hey, oh, okay, we're back to the title slide, but it's different. When I was young, that was called Strawberry Gulch. In the 90s, I think, I learned that it was called Li Fu Gulch. Li Fu was, Chinese came to this country as a ship's crew, went to work in the woods, lost a leg in a terrible accident in the woods, and he needed something where that his mobility wouldn't be challenged. Same story, by the way, as Charlie Walker, the photographer. Lost a leg and needed an occupation that didn't require that kind of agility. Li Fu was, yeah.
The story that I heard was that he cut his leg off himself.
Yeah, or I've also read that he was in the process of cutting it off when they rescued him. But either way, his leg was crushed and of no further use to him. Apparently very well liked. His funeral was really well attended. Everybody liked to go hunting and fishing with him or partying, whatever. But they insisted in good American fashion, anglicizing his name. So he was Charlie Li Fu. No, his name was Li Fu. Sorry, people. And he is buried in the Catholic cemetery up here at Cuffy's Cove. I don't know if his grave is still easier to find. They put a new headboard on it a few years ago.
I remember the wooden cross.
Yeah, okay.
It was bulldozed.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that was kind of cleared away, so maybe they don't exactly
Yeah.
know where he was buried, but there's a stone there.
Dorothy might know, but
Yeah?
yeah.
Dorothy Sanklo?
Yeah. I can't call her Kong. It's just, it's Dorothy Sankla.
Well, Annika read that he, after he lost his leg, he became a barber.
Yeah.
In a house right on the street there.
Yes. Right where that one is, there was the company meat market. And in the back, he had his barber shop and he had an aviary. Yeah.
Plants
Yeah, yeah.
birds. Very popular.
And the famous picture of him and the other guy with the heap of fish, that was right at the bottom of that gulch.
That's amazing.
Yeah. That's Greenwood Ridge back there. Li Fu, that little gully coming down the side of the cliff of Greenwood Ridge, it's marshy out in those fields in the wet seasons, and then it comes together from the church to about the new post office, all kind of comes together into that little water course there. That's Greenwood Ridge, and that's Cliff Ridge over there, and it's C-L-I-F-T. I don't care what it says on the maps. It's C-L-I-F-T. And a lot of us old coots here just go out of our way to pronounce the T, Cliff Ridge. There is no cliff up there. I've been everywhere on that ridge. There's no cliff up there. And by the way, it is named after him. Osro Cliff, Osro, not Orso. It gets written Orso in many sources here. His wife and their 2 daughters, the girls were both born up there at the Cliff House, which still exists, by the way. And they're all buried in Oakland. There's some really nice big cemeteries up against the hill there in Oakland, and Ellie White is buried there, many of the prominent old locals. It was the place to die. Yeah, so Cliff, out of respect, I'll call it Cliff Ridge. All my time here, we called that the lumber yard. Well, it had been the lumber yard for the Ellie White Lumber Company, but in '52, Warren Daniels built the big sawmill there. It was his lumber yard too, so that's the lumber yard, folks. The state park there is the lumber yard. I want to tell you, since you guys are docents, there used to be a little tiny bit of a railroad trestle right there, right across top of that, and the locomotive shops were right here, and they used to throw stuff off. They would remove broken, worn out parts off locomotives and just roll them off the cliff to watch them go. Right here on this beach, there must be a layer of locomotive wheels and railroad wheels and stuff in the sand. I've only ever seen them once. The waves had them uncovered. I have a little piece of video of Shea driver wheels with the gears on the end of them. And one of the wheels off that little scooter, that Winton, is down there. So if you guys are ever feeling in an archaeological mood, that's the place to dig. That is a hospital house. It was somebody's house before it was a hospital, but it was a hospital for a pretty good long time. Two of my older brothers were born here in town, but they were not born at the hospital. They were born at home in the first two houses north of the Harbor House. That's Muley Barn Rock. Maud the mule carried the lumber, dragged the lumber out to the end of the wharf. There were 4 mules named Maud. They were replaced by about 1922 with a little gasoline-powered tractor. That's the Wharf Rock or Arch Rock or the old. So remember the earlier road that came down to Cuffy's Cove? Well, Cuffy's Cove is no longer relevant. In 1899 or thereabouts, real close there, Emmett Donahue, no relation to the Donahue Ranch, county surveyor, laid out this course over the McMaster place up on top of the ridge and down the end of the ridge, right off that. You can still see the road coming down across the hill here back of town. It's not as easy now. There's no sheep eating the grass down to dirt level, so it's not as easy to see. And where it crosses that little gulch there is remnants of a little bridge in there. We used to walk that bridge to get up top, over that road to get up top the hill. That's it for the place names, guys. Now, I got one more program. Do we have time?
It's 5 on the nose.
Okay.
It's up to you guys. We have, this part was supposed to be till 5, and then you have your next one at 5:30, so.
Yeah.
It's up to the docents as far as. The next part is the timeline.
Yeah, this is the timeline. This is dating photographs. When photographs get donated to you, this should help you date when they were taken.
Right.
I'd be happy to run it if anybody.
Yeah, as long as it's done by 5:30.
Yeah.
Then people come for the other one at 5:30.
Yeah.
There actually
Okay.
is,
All right. Let's do what we can. Then. Yeah.
There actually is a envelope in the museum right now that someone dropped off.
Yes, I had a little bit of a look at it today. Yeah. And those photographs all appear to be after I left here. So I don't think I can help with them. Yeah.
Anyways, we'll have it recorded,
Yeah, okay. All right, so I'll just press on here. Everybody knows that picture of the mill. I colorized that back in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was just sitting there on company time, colorized that picture. That kind of started me down the road to colorizing these photographs. You have that timeline notation, so every event, every change here is going to be mentioned at the appropriate place in that. So usually what we can do is no earlier than, no later than. Sometimes we can narrow it down to a really short period. I've got also just general information here noted in these orange balloons. So, so when was this picture taken? Well, the mill exists, so it's after 1889, right? Or so. Oh, hey, second boiler's been added after 1894. The creamery is there. Well, it was built in about 1901, okay? Tan bark mill is gone from the beach. It's been there. You see that tramway coming down there. That was to haul tan bark up to the lumber yard. So it's burned. That burned Thanksgiving Day, 1901, no matter what Walter Metzen said in his book.
Can I ask you what tan bark was used for?
Tanning leather. The tan oak tree, lots of tannin in it, and it was a huge commercial product in those days. Yeah. That's the Occidental Hotel. It was on the west side of the main street, burned November of 1906. There's the 4 dormers. That's the easy one to see. It's 4 dormers on this face, and they're not evenly spaced. So my best guess is no earlier than November 1901, no later than November 1906. So we've narrowed that down to a 5-year span. That's not bad. That's not bad for an old photograph. Nobody was alive to see it. All right, Cuffy's Cove, we'll start there. Very few early photos of Cuffy's Cove. This is one from the deck of a schooner. That's a marvelous picture.
That is a great color.
Those are apron chutes over there. You can see how the lumber just slide down. And this is a wire chute over here. Hand crank, great big like a ship's wheel that was hand powered. And it was up freight, brought in from San Francisco area, any manufactured goods. And then down freight was lumber or ties. So, yeah, and I've colorized a lot of these pictures. Just, yeah, I love the old sepia and everything like that, but sometimes details pop out of these with color. So most surviving photographs of Cuffy's Cove were later in its life and overlap with Greenwood history. You won't find very many early ones. This may have been predated Greenwood. That was a pretty old picture. This is the Fred Hilmke sawmill, so the Cameron Road junction is right straight up the hill there, up on top. From there. That's on bedrock right there. And there's a locomotive there, so this is after 1876, by the way. The steam over on the right-hand side, I think, is from the Dixon shingle mill that was almost co-located. There was very nearly a town built up here. A guy was building a hotel up here just downstream from this place at one point. That locomotive, I have the building papers for it from Baldwin Locomotive Works, built in 1876. It was ordered by West Evans, the tie tycoon, and by the time it was delivered, a couple months later, he was bankrupt. Bankrupt doesn't mean the same thing as broke, folks. It does not. And so the locomotive was actually delivered to Ellie White at Cuffy's Cove. Guess what? Ellie White wasn't at Cuffy's Cove at the time. I think Ellie White was a secret behind the curtains player in Cuffy's Cove from about this time on. Dixon Shingle Mill's over there. The first dam on Greenwood Creek was built right there. It was a little pond behind this mill. That now became dam number 3 because of the other 2 that were built farther downstream. I have a picture of my wife standing on that little pointy rock in the lower left corner in her Familaris, great hiking shoes. This is looking toward Greenwood from the top of the wire chute, and look at this big hand wheel here. That's how they powered cargo back and forth to the ship. Guys, grab those spokes. Yeah, a lot of work, folks. I think that is the steamer Fideliter on the left there. It is, it's not a lumber schooner. That's a steam packet. That runs up and down carrying people and cargo and stuff. So I think that is the Fideliter, and it was wrecked. We have that date. It's in your handout. I can't prove it, but it is consistent with what I do know about it. No Greenwood there yet, all right? So before 1888 or thereabouts, that's an early photo. There's the old Cuffy's Cove, the church, St. Mary's Star of the Sea. Yeah. And it looks like it's late in its life. Looks like windows are broken out and shingles are missing. So that's probably a fairly late photo of it. James Kenny donated the land, good Irish Catholic. It was completed in 1880. Last services there for 30 years. Last Mass was, I think, the year before, and torn down in 1916. So if it's Cuffy's Cove is in the background, and you can see that church is not there, photo probably from after 1816. There's Ellie White's first attempt at a wharf. That's the bottom of Lee Fu Gulch, and those timbers are still on the rock there. That washed off. I mean, he built that thing, and the first winter storm wave just swept it right off the rock. That's all that's left. I took that picture with my drone. I did not fly my drone over the state park. Yeah, Strawberry Gulch. You can still see the excavated rail bed in the bedrock right there about halfway down the gulch. Or from the top, it looks like that. That's real pretty now. Lots of flowers. That's the wharf coming down. This is from the top of the wharf rock. I have climbed that rock. Not in a very long time. That's the hoisting works up there for the cars. Gravity would, of course, pull a loaded car down, and the loaded car would pull the empty cars back up. Maud, the mule, would take over when it got to the bottom, pull it out to the end, and that is Maud's little shed right there on that rock. Warehouse for down freight. Yeah, I'm going to talk about shipping tomorrow. That's the muley barn. And I don't think mules are much concerned about things they can't see because she couldn't tell she was 30 feet above tide rock. I would be uncomfortable in that place, but the mule wasn't. So can we date this photo? Yeah, the mill has 2 boilers, so it's after 1894. The hotel has dormers on the 3rd floor there. That was added in the spring of 1902, so it's after that. Oh, and there's the Occidental Hotel that burned in November of 06. So it's between 02 and 06, this photograph. There'll be a test, by the way, when we're done here. Yeah.
So these hotels, were they for the workers?
Yeah. Remember, this was empty pasture land out here when White started to build his sawmill. He had to build a hotel, a bunch of workers' cabins, a cookhouse, and a company store to draw people, workers in to build the mill, the dam, the railroad. And he began all that stuff at the same time. This is a huge project. So that hotel was the original hotel. Then other private people came in, bought a lot of land and built their own hotels in competition. Yeah, oh, the very tall, we talked about that earlier. This is a very tall flagpole. Just about 2 weeks ago, I started researching this, and in photographs as early as 1897, I can see it, but a photograph I can date to 1917, it's gone. So that's when that flagpole was there. That flagpole, that's a 3-story building right behind it, guys. And those were high ceilings. There were like 12-foot ceilings in that hotel. So I'm thinking that flagpole is at least 100 feet tall. That is a...
Right in front of the visitor center.
Huh?
It's right in front of the visitor center.
Yeah, just off to the right, out the front door. Just, I think, yeah. All right. 1886. Company is doing business. Company store is doing business. Company hotel is advertising in the local papers. They haven't even really started on the mill yet. That's the first company store, and I just think there's some cool stuff in this picture.
West side of Highway 1, probably?
I'm sorry, what?
West side of Highway 1, the store? Or you think maybe?
Where that is just south of the visitor center. Just yeah.
Right.
And not very far, because I think the flagpole was actually erected to be on the north side of this building, and then they moved the company store. Okay. So that's what I suspect. I love some details in this picture. First company store, that is Baldwin number 3858. The Tycoon was the name of the locomotive. He was a railroad tycoon, and it was named after him. I have a piece of the driver wheels of that locomotive. I just visited it yesterday. Western Union Telegraph Office, folks, long time ago. You could sit here in Greenwood and watch the stock market. Notary Public and Conveyancer is what that sign says. Conveyancer would file papers for you in the county seat or that sort of thing. So, and I assume they would turn in catalog orders and just all kinds of things like that. Lots of services needed in a frontier town. Well, let's see, what else? Steam schooners. Oh, they launched the first 2 steam schooners, the Greenwood and the Whitesboro. They were nearly identical. I can see some little differences. It's kind of hard to tell with Whitesboro. It's covered with lumber, loaded until the main deck is at sea level, and then they pile tan bark on top of that. That's a well-laden ship. So they were both launched in 1886. They sold the Greenwood in 1903, and they sold the Whitesboro in 1917. So if you have those ships in the photo, there's the span. Cuffy's Cove Catholic Church is there. So this is between 1880 and 1916, that photo. Oh, by the way, the next 2, the following year, they built 2 more steam schooners, the Alcatraz and the Alcazar. And these were built by 2 different shipyards, so they're very different boats, very distinctive. By the way, the second picture is taken in 1904. They're bringing a Shea locomotive boiler ashore. You can see it in the sling there. And the Alcatraz, you have the name board there in the up off the wheelhouse. Wrecked at Greenwood in 1917. Wrecked at Needle Rock up past Rockport in 1907. So those, if you have those. That didn't colorize very well. That's dam number 1 at the mouth of Greenwood Creek. It was completed in 1888. And yeah, I just went down and had a look at it today. The tan bark mill has been built and is gone by this photo. So this is after November 1901. There's the railroad right-of-way running up the top of the hill. There used to be a blacksmith shop up there. I have no idea who ran it, anything like that. All we know is the forge was still in place when I was a little kid. And my mother jumped off that cliff once. Once. So in 37, California Fish and Game asked Warren Daniels to dynamite the dam and drain the pond and open it up to Steelhead Run. So that's where he set the charges. And I'll bet you he rattled the teacups all over town because that was like a... Warren was enthusiastic with his dynamite. He is one of the people who harvested the metal out of the Milwaukee, this cruiser Milwaukee at Eureka, out on the Humboldt Bar. It went aground and they harvested scrap metal out of it for years. This is the oldest picture I know of that mill. 1889, by then it's under construction. The 3 little bunkhouses there at the top of the bluff, you'll see those in the early photographs. You will not see them in later ones. The building below them is the cookhouse. He had to build that before he could call a crew in to work on his thing. Oh, by the way, the Drew House, the present Elk Cove Inn, is over there on the right-hand side. That's a very old building, one of the oldest ones in town. But look up there in the upper right corner, there's Donahue House too, already here and well established. What else have I got there? There are timeline clues in this photo. 1 boiler, so it's before 1894. Well, the mill isn't even finished, so they said it was, by 1890, it was sawing lumber, but wasn't completed yet. A building around it wasn't that important. They had to get cutting lumber. Elk Cove Inn, already occupied. The cookhouse, that was there until 1918, but we'll get to that. 3 smaller, and they were torn down in 1898, replaced by a large bunkhouse. There's Donahue House back there. And I know the real estate listing said it was, hi. We're actually just doing docent training. Have a seat. The actual program hasn't started yet.
Yeah, finishing up with one thing and then.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I should look at my watch and see when it is we're finishing up. Keep an eye on that.
About 10 minutes.
Yeah, okay. I think we're good. All right, so there's timeline clues that are available in this photo. Oop. I thought I was going to caption them. Yeah, the single boiler means it's before 1894. The west side of town hasn't been developed yet. It doesn't look like the pond is even full yet. Well, maybe it is. All right. This is the Greenwood Hotel. It's got timeline clues in this picture too. Here's a load of railroad ties coming into town to be shipped out. The tie yard was just past the hotel between it and Matson's livery stable. And the ties were stacked there, and there's a rail line that ran from there down to the wharf. They were shipped out of here. But they weren't all the lumber companies shipping them. There were independent tie whacks that would move their product through that yard. This end of the hotel was called the Annex, and you'll find that in Flora Buchanan's book and some others. The Annex, it was actually originally Rodney Phillips, the first postmaster. He also, by the way, ran the sawmill for L.E. White initially. Rodney Phillips' house, and it was built across the street and moved by donkey engine over, spun around, and butted up against the company hotel. My bedroom was in the back. All right, so the dormers were added to the second, it created a 3rd floor. They called them workman's rooms. They were dingy little rooms. There were a couple of them that only had a transom light above the door, a transom window above the door. That was the only light in the room other than your lantern. But they put those dormers up there. They were still dark little rooms. They were probably $1.50 a month. That was called the social hall. It was also the location of the 3rd and final, and it burned with the hotel when the hotel burned.
Did it have a false front at some
Yes, it did. That was added later on.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to find out when. And also, this front porch of the hotel at some point was glassed in. So I'm going to try to find that too. Because I lived in that darn hotel, I should know that sort of thing. All right, third story wing was torn down in 1952. Eddie Curti did some of the work, my brother David. Eddie Curti broke his finger. It's still kind of got a stiff finger from that work. All right, Rodney Phillips House, I mentioned, here's the 1892 Sanborn map, and there's the hotel on the right side of the street, and there's Rodney Phillips House up there on the upper left, and here's the old original company store. So what would be right between the Rodney Phillips House and the old company store? The visitor center, right? That's exactly where it sits. Anyway, they moved the house across the street, turned it around 180 degrees to face the street again, and butted it up against the hotel, and that's where I lived. That was a big, I think I counted up 68 bedrooms in that hotel. I usually at any one time had 2 or 3. I'd move around. My mother never knew where to find us. So where exactly did all this happen? Yeah, it's still in town. There's the present location of the visitor center and the new post office. That's about where all this stuff's at. So that little thing just the northeast corner of the old company store is a fire hydrant, but I think that's about where the flagpole stood. It's kind of right in that area somewhere, the 100-foot flagpole. All right, back to the mill. Second boiler was added in 1894. So 2 stacks on the west side of the mill. Cookhouse ran from 1888 to 1918. 1918, Goodyear Company decided, we've got a grown-up town here, got mostly married workers. We don't have to feed these guys anymore, and they tore down the cookhouse. I'll talk about that in the Greenwood Ranch thing later on. Doc's Occidental Hotel. So once again, this photograph is dated before 1906, after 1894, before 1906. Hola.
Finishing up the timeline and the photo dating part,
Yeah. We got 7 minutes.
Okay.
It might be enough if I talk a little less. No creamery, so we know this picture was taken before 1901. Looking up the pond. So looking up the pond, we see the first bridge over Greenwood Creek, that little low S-turn bridge there, and it ran under, the road, Coast Road ran under the log dump. So that was a high log dump. Dropped the logs about 30 feet into the pond there. There's a tie hoist that was built in 1895. Thank you, Dave Spohr, for that piece of information. They could raise ties that were floated down the creek up to the upper railroad track and just take them directly to the wharf. They didn't have to work them through the pockets of the pond. That would have been a lot of work. Coast Road passes under the high log dump. Sorry, I leaned on the button. First bridge over Greenwood Creek, built in about 1888. Didn't need a bridge before there was a pond. So they built the bridge. The Horseshoe Bridge, you can just see back there, as they extended the railroad down to Elk Creek, that's when they built that bridge. There's a high railroad bridge just upstream from where the fill on the Coast Highway. You can see that in some of the photographs taken from up to town. Mendocino Railroad right-of-way is still visible up there on the hillside. There's a little bit of excavated bed there, but you know, half of the rest of it was on trestle work. This is this is the last, and this is the current alignment of the Greenwood Ridge Road. And yeah, surveyed in 1899. I don't know if it was built right away or not. All right, here we go with the tan bark mill. This is the best photograph I could find of it. To the left of the mill, right there on the beach, good sized structure, and it's just a terrible picture. I just don't have anything better than that. But that was a tan bark mill. You can see the tramway came down for hoisting the product up to the lumberyard and then on to the wharf.
So go up, and the long building at the top?
That's a bunkhouse.
And it was out on that point before you drop in?
Yeah.
I always look at that going, that had to be where that's at.
Yeah.
Because the road going to the beach now would be above that, on the right?
Kind of right down through the middle of it. I walked that today, and I really couldn't orient all this stuff anymore. It's been recontoured there so much. All right. Here's an easy one, guys. There were originally three small bunkhouses at the top of the bluff there. In 1898, they replaced them with one big one. The school and the Catholic Church both built in about 1898. School was completed first. Torn down summer of 1956. Catholic Church is still there, minus that big steeple over the transept. There's this concrete style after this wooden one. They drove herds of cattle through town and stuff like that. They had to have fences over every yard and everything. Can you imagine losing a herd of cattle to everybody's backyard, you know? Yeah. So there was a style. They put a concrete one there. It was bulldozed off the hill right behind where after they tore this down before they built the new school. It's still there if you want to dig it. It's got 1911 cast right into the side of it. Transept was removed. Around 1900, they planted that cypress hedge all the way up to the Donahue house. Lauren Denon bought this. If you want to visit the old Greenwood School, go up and stay in one of his cottages there at Heritage House, because that's where the lumber went. New company store was built in 1899, and the first manager was my uncle, William Fuller. It was on the site of the old Rodney Phillips house, which you just saw moved away. The visitor center would be right there, and we're kind of running out of time now. But original store was dragged over there with a donkey engine, butted up against the back, and they had a lot of storage space then. Railroad spur ran from the top of the wharf. They could bring stuff in on a ship and straight to the store. That cypress hedge, and you remember that, Alan, when that cypress hedge was still there north of the post office. And yeah, my uncle William Fuller ran the company store and is actually responsible in part for me being here. Because it kind of goes like this. There were no events that happened in 1900 locally that had anything to do with anything except Helen P. White, the widow of Will White, sole owner of L.E. White Lumber Company, married her attorney, Frank C. Drew, and around the same time, John S. Ross married Lulu Willis, and in the Drew house in the Elk Cove Inn, 1900, and that kind of set the stage. I think I'll stop here, but that is the Horseshoe Bridge. You can kind of see why it's called that. It made nearly a 180-degree turn, and that's dam number 2 that was built in 1900. And for the docents, I'll run this whole thing again sometime. Just ran out of time. Guys, you'll find that I talk too much. Good to see ya.